Johnny, I know this sounds weird, but there are some people out there who actually believe the royal family are lizard people masquerading as the royal family. That's a bit strange, I must admit. But you know, our world leaders are masquerading as something they're not, Johnny. They're masquerading, or what as? Yeah, they're masquerading as people that seem to actually care about the people, care about the freedoms, care about upholding human rights and all that sort of stuff. Holy shit! Yeah, it seems they want to come across as freedom fighters and leaving us all alone and letting us live our lives and all that sort of bullshit. But in actual fact, when the pressure gets on, they want to control every fucking thing we do. They're part of a fucking repressive regime. Oh, Jesus, Johnny, have you got anything to support that bloody theory?
Hey, have you noticed that neoliberal globalists like Justin Trudeau and Rishi Sunak are applauding Chinese protesters? Well done, stand up for freedom. Yet when there were protesters in their country, oh, you anti-vaxxers, you caused all these problems. And if they love protest so much, why are they quietly and slyly passing anti-protest laws? What have they got planned for your future?
So, Johnny, you're saying that most of the politicians stride around the world stage looking like they're some sort of freedom fighter and standing up for the good of the people and all that sort of bloody stuff, when actually they're not doing that at all? Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's all a charade. It would be a conspiracy theory, Johnny, if it wasn't happening before our very eyes.
You've noticed, of course, that in China there are continual protests against the draconian lockdown measures. What you may be surprised by is that the Western media are now calling it a new Tiananmen Square. Look at them bravely standing up against authoritarianism. Hold on a minute.
There have been protests in dozens of cities, in major urban centers from Shanghai to Sichuan, in college campuses, in business districts. You've seen people coming out onto the streets and protesting against the zero COVID policy that has kept them locked in their homes for many months.
Protesters in Shanghai chanting "Step Down," aimed at China's leader Xi Jinping and the ruling Communist Party. But also this. Videos from Shanghai earlier today showing protesters being roughed up and dragged away by police. People can be heard yelling, "Release them." As CNN's Selena Wang is in Beijing. Selena, what is happening there? What is the latest?
Paula, what we are witnessing right now, it's an extraordinary, historic moment in China. These protests are breaking out across the country, from here in the capital in Beijing to elite college campuses to other major metropolises and even far-flung cities.
Assistant to the Secretary of Defense John Kirby was asked about the protests. Let's take a listen to that.
I was hoping, what is the White House's message, the president's message to people in China who are peacefully protesting COVID lockdowns there? And then,
and our message to peaceful protesters around the world is the same and consistent. People should be allowed the right to assemble and to peacefully protest policies or laws or dictates that they take issue with.
According to the Philippine Consul General, he called the demonstrations in Shanghai an act of solidarity.
In protesting against the country's strict COVID-19 rules, and various countries, interestingly across the world, are also extending their support for the demonstrations inside China. And in the latest list to join the outside nations who are supporting the protesters in China is Canada. In a statement, Justin Trudeau said that Canada stands with the people who are expressing themselves.
Yeah, Johnny, it seems that we've got this collective amnesia now about all this sort of stuff, because just a couple of years ago we were all locked down. Yeah, just like in China. Well, yeah, there seems to be a bloody double standard there.
But I want to ask you about an entirely different issue. We're seeing some very different reporting from our media on China's anti-lockdown protesters compared to how they characterise anti-lockdown protesters in places like Australia and Canada and the UK. You've been outspoken about this double standard for some time. Do you think the mainstream media in the West is learning the error of its ways?
I doubt it. I was in Toronto this week speaking, among other things, at a monk debate about the mainstream media and its failures in Canada, particularly during a trucker convoy earlier this year. So it was very moving to me, as I'm sure it was to you, Rita, to see Justin Trudeau celebrating the right of Chinese people to protest against lockdowns in China. The same Justin Trudeau who did everything he could to prevent protests in his own native Canada. I think we're seeing something similar in the press as we are with certain politicians. They say, what a wonderful thing it is for people to protest lockdowns in China, but don't you dare do it in Australia or Canada or Britain or America.
It's bloody great to protest in China. Good on them, but you better not bloody protest over here.
Canadians are watching very closely. Obviously, everyone in China should be allowed to express themselves, should be allowed to share their perspectives and indeed protest.
Do you think for a moment there it crossed his mind, oh no, what about when I tried to introduce the Emergency Act so that I could arrest those truckers and shut down those protests, freezing bank accounts and shutting down donation sites? How are we supposed to live with this hypocrisy?
We're going to continue to ensure that China knows we'll stand up for human rights, we'll stand with people who are expressing themselves.
Trudeau, I'm starting to not like that prick.
An aggressive move, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau invoking the Emergencies Act to crack down on anti-vaccine mandate protests. This move allows the federal government to expand measures to clear the blockades by hundreds of truckers that are disturbing residents and harming the economy.
We're going to continue to ensure that China knows we'll stand up for human rights, we'll stand with people who are expressing themselves.
I think that maybe they stand up for human rights and the ability for people to express themselves if there are no political consequences for them. Are you beginning to think that that's what this movement is?
Australia now, where an anti-lockdown protest in Melbourne has turned violent. Police arrested demonstrators and used pepper spray as hundreds of people took to the streets. Protesters say the lockdown is authoritarian.
Anger boils over in Melbourne. These protesters want their freedoms back. The city is in its 6th lockdown. Now the restrictions have been extended to the entire state.
Videos from Shanghai earlier today showing protesters being roughed up and dragged away by police. People can be heard yelling, "Release them."
You're saying, Johnny, that the leaders particularly, they're condemning the actions of the Chinese government when those actions were taking place in their own countries 2 years ago. Is that what you're bloody saying? It seems in China, Johnny, if you protest, you're going to be beaten and pepper sprayed. Yes, pepper sprayed. Surprise, surprise, that sort of thing happens in bloody Australia 2 years ago. And it seems the police around the world just do whatever the fucking government tells them. Does anybody in the police force actually question the government when they're given these directives?
Natural being, and I want to choose over my own body and my own free will, and that's why I'm here.
Tens of thousands of protesters across the continent came out to march and demonstrate against the COVID restrictions in their countries. Last month, Austria became the first country in Western Europe to reimpose a full COVID-19 lockdown. But still, more than 40,000 people came out this weekend to protest these measures.
But Johnny, back then we had to do what we were told. If you didn't do what you were told, you got a bloody hiding, and it was for our own good.
In capital Brussels was today the latest European city to see unrest over tightened coronavirus restrictions. Tens of thousands of people marched in protest, some threw fireworks at police officers who intervened with tear gas and water cannon.
So back in the day, Johnny, it seems that lockdowns were a great idea. If we don't go along with it, we'll all be in bloody trouble, and it's the best for the nation. But now, the poor bastards in China, they got a bloody protest. Go the Chinese.
Obviously, everyone in China should be allowed to express themselves.
Even freeze bank accounts, Brianna. Some of these people may go to the ATM, try and get out money and can't. I think what many people are skeptical of is whether or not this was even needed. The reason? It is all about enforcement.
Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak pledged that police will have whatever powers were required to crack down on disruptive protests.
All these little new protest laws, Johnny, they're sort of slipped in quietly through the back door, and we don't really know what's going on about it. Until we go to protest about something, any bloody thing, the government can just bloody say that's an illegal protest. You can't be protesting illegally, as if a bloody protest is supposed to be legal in the first place. That's what a fucking protest is, for Christ's sake.
Hey, you're under arrest!
This afternoon I sat down with all the police chiefs to make it clear that they have my full support in acting decisively to clamp down on illegal protests.
Got to clamp down on the illegal ones. Legal protests, ones that don't do anything, that are irrelevant and are in China. Carry on with those, I'll support them. Illegal ones, ones that are here and are against my interest, check my bank account.
It is completely unacceptable that ordinary members of the public are having their lives disrupted by a selfish minority.
He does look good in a suit, that bloke.
View is that those who break the law should feel the full force of it, and that's what I'm determined to deliver.
Yeah, and that depends on who makes the bloody laws and how much of the full force of it is going to be bloody perpetrated.
Alignment with the principles that they're continually espousing.
We are currently giving the police new powers so that they can clamp down on these illegal protests.
Giving the police new powers. There it is. That's moving towards a police state. Advancing the powers of the police force. Do you remember voting? Do you remember being asked? No, me neither.
They will have my full support in acting decisively and rapidly to end the misery and the disruption that's being caused to ordinary families up and down the country who are trying just to go about their day-to-day lives.
The misery and disruption is not as a result of illegal protests. The misery and disruption is as a result of a lack of protests against the cost of living crisis, the corruption in government, the inability to clamp down and control the profiteering from globalist entities such as Big Pharma, Big Tech, protests against a media that will not report the truth to ordinary people. Can you not see that what we're witnessing now is a globalist agenda being asserted via national institutions such as the police force without democratic due process?
And I've said to the police, but whatever they need from government, they will have in terms of new powers. We're already giving them some, and I want to back them to use them.
Well, if you weren't terrified before, you should be terrified now. And
I think we've got to protest more, Johnny, about there not being enough bloody protests. So everything's okay, Johnny, as long as we get around believing that we're all living in this free democracy, when in actual fact we're not living in that at all. Well, Johnny, the people of the world, they're not going to put up with this stuff. They're not just going to let things happen like that. These governments will be brought down. I'm very confident of that.